When the clock strikes 3, do whispers in the dark call out to you? Welcome to Shady's Night Terrors, where every night we delve into stories that stalk the dark corners of your mind. Join us as we explore chilling tales that make the bravest hearts quiver and the boldest eyes shut tight. Don't just listen, experience the spine-tingling, the eerie, the downright terrifying. Dare to be our guest tonight, whisper, then let the nightmares begin.
The Sleepover. It was supposed to be a night of fun and laughter. Emily, Sophie, and Chloe had been planning their sleepover at Sophie's house for weeks. Sophie's home was an old Victorian mansion on the outskirts of town, a grand structure filled with history and charm. As the girls set up their sleeping bags in the spacious living room, the old house creaked and groaned, its wooden beams and floorboards echoing with a life of their own. As dusk turned to night, the girls entertained themselves with movies, snacks, and ghost stories. Emily, the most imaginative of the three, spun elaborate tales of haunted houses and restless spirits. Chloe and Sophie laughed, their nerves soothed by the familiar, cozy setting. "Are you sure this place isn't haunted?" Emily teased, looking around the shadowy corners of the room. Sophie chuckled. "Trust me, if it were, I'd have seen a ghost by now. My family has lived here for generations." Chloe, a bit more superstitious, shivered and pulled her blanket tighter. "Still, it's kind of creepy, don't you think?" The girls eventually drifted off to sleep, the flickering light of the TV casting dancing shadows on the walls. Emily, tired but happy, felt a sense of comfort in the presence of her friends. In the dead of night, Emily woke up. Or at least, she thought she did. She couldn't move a muscle. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the dimly lit surroundings. Sophie and Chloe were fast asleep beside her. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she realized she was experiencing sleep paralysis. A shadow moved in the corner of the room. Emily's breath quickened as she watched the dark figure slowly take shape. It was a tall, gaunt man, his eyes hollow and lifeless. He wore old-fashioned clothes, like something out of a Victorian portrait. The figure drifted closer, its movements smooth and unnatural. Emily wanted to scream, to wake her friends, but she was frozen in place. The man stopped at the edge of her sleeping bag and stared down at her. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Instead, a series of images flooded Emily's mind. She saw Sophie's house, but not as it was now. It was rundown, decaying. She saw a family living there, a man, a woman, and 2 children. The man, the same figure now standing over her, was filled with rage. She watched in horror as he attacked his family, one by one. The final image was of the man hanging himself from the rafters in the attic. The vision ended abruptly, and Emily found herself able to move again. She sat up, gasping for air, and looked around. The shadowy figure was gone, but the room felt colder, darker. She shook Sophie and Chloe awake, her voice trembling. "Guys, I just had the worst nightmare," she whispered, recounting her experience. Sophie listened, her expression growing more serious. "That sounds like a story my grandmother used to tell. She said the original owner of this house went mad and killed his family. But I always thought it was just a story." Chloe, now wide awake and terrified, suggested they leave the living room and go upstairs to Sophie's bedroom. The girls gathered their blankets and tiptoed up the creaky staircase, feeling the weight of the house's history pressing down on them. They settled into Sophie's room, the smaller space providing a false sense of security. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced at the attic door at the end of the hallway, a shiver running down her spine. As they tried to fall back asleep, Emily felt a strange compulsion to investigate the attic. She resisted at first, but the pull grew stronger, almost as if the house itself was calling her. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake the others, and made her way down the hall. The attic door creaked open easily, revealing a set of narrow, rickety stairs. Emily climbed slowly, her heart pounding with each step. The attic was pitch black, but a faint light seemed to emanate from the far corner. She followed it, drawn like a moth to a flame. In the corner she found an old trunk. The light was seeping out from the edges, flickering like a dying candle. Emily opened the trunk, and inside she found a collection of old photographs and letters. The images showed the family from her vision, their faces twisted in fear and anguish. Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut. Emily spun around, but there was no one there. The temperature dropped further, and she could see her breath misting in the air. The shadowy figure reappeared, this time joined by the specters of the man's family. They surrounded her, their ghostly eyes filled with sorrow. "Leave this place," a voice whispered, echoing off the attic walls. "The house is cursed. It will consume you as it did us." Emily stumbled back, her mind racing. She grabbed one of the letters from the trunk and fled down the stairs, bursting into Sophie's room. The other girls woke up, startled by her sudden entrance. "We have to leave," Emily gasped, handing Sophie the letter. "This house is haunted. The spirits, they want us to go." Sophie read the letter, her face growing pale. It was a confession from the man, detailing his descent into madness and the murders of his family. The final lines were a warning to anyone who lived in the house after him. The girls didn't hesitate. They gathered their things and fled the house, running through the darkened streets until they reached the safety of Emily's home. There, they called their parents and told them everything. Sophie's family moved out of the house the next day, leaving it to stand empty and abandoned. The mansion on the outskirts of town became a place of whispers and fear, a dark reminder of the horrors that once occurred within its walls. And though the girls never spoke of that night again, the memory of the sleepover haunted them for the rest of their lives. Emily especially could never forget the ghostly figures and the terrible secrets they had revealed. She knew that some houses held more than just memories. They held the echoes of past sins, waiting to ensnare anyone who dared to uncover them. The Haunting of Redwood Farm. The old Redwood Farm stood isolated in the middle of an expansive, windswept field. It had been abandoned for decades, the wooden planks of its walls rotting and the windows perpetually shuttered. The farmhouse had a reputation, a dark history whispered about by the few locals who remembered the tales of the demented Redwood family and their macabre collection of blood-filled jars. Jake, a city dweller by birth, had inherited the property from a distant relative he'd never met. Desperate for a change of scenery and intrigued by the mystery, he decided to spend a weekend there, imagining a quaint retreat from his hectic life. As his car rumbled up the overgrown driveway, the farmhouse loomed ahead, foreboding in the twilight. The sun dipped below the horizon as Jake pushed open the heavy, creaking door. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of dust and something else he couldn't quite place. His footsteps echoed through the empty rooms as he explored, each creak of the floorboards amplifying the eerie silence. He found old furniture draped in white sheets, cobwebs hanging like tattered lace, and, in the basement, the jars. Hundreds of them lined the shelves, each filled with a dark, viscous liquid. The labels were faded, but he could make out dates, spanning over a century. The sight made his skin crawl. He knew the stories but hadn't believed them until now. Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he hurried back upstairs, intending to pack up and leave immediately. But as he reached the front door, he found it locked, the key missing from his pocket. Panic set in as he tried to break a window, only to find them all boarded up from the outside. It was as if the house itself had come alive, determined to keep him within its decaying walls. Jake's frantic search for an escape led him back to the basement, drawn by a low hum that seemed to emanate from the jars. He approached cautiously, his breath visible in the sudden cold. One jar, larger and more prominent than the others, caught his attention. It pulsed with a sinister energy, the liquid inside churning as if alive. Curiosity overpowered his fear, and he reached out, touching the cold glass. A surge of energy shot through him, and he staggered back, gasping for breath. His vision blurred, and he saw flashes of the past, the Redwood family, their twisted rituals, and the terrible secret of the jars. The liquid wasn't just blood, it was a concoction of fear and torment, collected over generations. The family had discovered a way to mix their victims' blood with an alchemical substance, causing the jars to fill endlessly, preserving their victims' essence in eternal agony. Desperation clawed at Jake's mind as he realized he was trapped in the very heart of this malevolent presence. He fled back upstairs, hearing whispers and laughter echoing through the halls. He hid in a small closet, trying to calm his racing heart, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The house was alive with the spirits of the past, and they were closing in on him. Hours passed, though it felt like days. Jake's mind was on the brink of collapse when he remembered the cellar's root door. It had been hidden behind old sacks of flour and rotted wood. Mustering every ounce of courage, he dashed out of his hiding place, the phantom's howls and shrieks echoing behind him. He found the door, yanking it open with trembling hands. Cold night air hit his face as he stumbled out, the farm's fields stretching endlessly before him. He didn't look back as he ran, his lungs burning, tears streaming down his face. He ran until the farmhouse was a distant memory, until he collapsed on the roadside, sobbing in relief. The authorities found him the next day, raving about the jars and the spirits. Few believed his story, dismissing it as the ravings of a madman. The Redwood Farm remained abandoned, its secrets buried within, waiting for the next unfortunate soul to stumble upon them. And in the basement, the jars still sat, the liquid within them swirling and pulsing, ever hungry, ever patient, ready to claim the next victim who dared to disturb their restless slumber. The endless run Tyler had always loved running. For him, it was more than just a sport. It was a way to clear his mind and push his limits. He trained hard for the annual Oakwood 5K, eager to beat his personal best. The small town's race attracted a modest crowd, but Tyler's competitive spirit made every run feel like the Olympics. The morning of the race was crisp and clear, the autumn leaves a vibrant canopy over the town's winding paths. Tyler joined the other runners at the starting line, his heart pounding with excitement. The announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeaker, and with a sharp blast from the horn, they were off. Tyler quickly found his pace, weaving through the crowd with practiced ease. The first mile flew by as he settled into a comfortable rhythm, the sound of his shoes hitting the pavement steady and reassuring. He glanced at his watch. Everything was on track. As he approached a wooded section of the course, he felt a surge of energy and decided to push harder. The trail twisted through the forest, the path narrowing as it wound between the trees. Tyler's focus was absolute, his mind honed in on the path ahead. But then disaster struck. His foot caught on a root, hidden beneath a layer of fallen leaves, and he stumbled forward, arms flailing. He hit the ground hard, pain exploding in his head as everything went black. When Tyler came to, he was lying on the trail. His head throbbed, and his vision was blurry, but he could still hear the distant sounds of the race. Determined not to give up, he forced himself to his feet and resumed running. Something felt off, though. His movements were sluggish, and the forest around him seemed strangely silent. Tyler's determination drove him on. He pushed through the discomfort, focusing on the finish line. But as he ran, he noticed something strange. The runners he passed didn't acknowledge him. They didn't cheer or offer words of encouragement. In fact, they didn't seem to see him at all. The realization hit him slowly, like a creeping fog. His breathing grew shallow, panic setting in. Tyler reached a clearing, and saw the finish line ahead. He sprinted towards it, but as he crossed, there was no cheering crowd, no finish line celebration. The area was eerily empty. Confused, Tyler wandered back to the wooded trail, trying to make sense of what was happening. He spotted another runner and called out, but they passed by as if he weren't there. Desperate for answers, he ran back to the spot where he'd fallen. The sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. There, on the ground, lay his own body, motionless and pale. Tyler stared, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. He was dead. He had died in the fall, and yet somehow he was still running. Panic gave way to a profound sadness as he realized the truth. As Tyler stood there, grappling with his fate, a figure emerged from the shadows. An older man, ghostly and translucent, approached with a look of understanding. "You're not the first," the man said softly. "This trail, it holds on to those who die here. We run endlessly until we accept our fate." Tyler felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. "How do I move on?" he asked, his voice trembling. The man smiled gently. "You have to let go, acknowledge what happened, and find peace in it. Only then can you truly be free." Tyler nodded, taking a deep breath. He looked down at his lifeless body one last time, then closed his eyes. He thought of his family, his friends, and the joy running had always brought him. He felt a warmth in his chest, a lightness that grew until it enveloped him completely. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer on the trail. He stood in a beautiful meadow, bathed in golden light. The pain was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. He was free. Back on the trail, the leaves rustled softly as if whispering a farewell. Tyler's body remained, but his spirit had moved on, leaving behind only the memory of a runner who had found his way to the finish line at last. The Haunting of Mine Road. In the small, secluded town of Logan County, West Virginia, legends and whispers were as much a part of life as the coal that fueled the community. One tale in particular was etched deeply into the town's lore, the story of Mine Road. The narrow, winding path that led to the old mines had a dark history, one that had been passed down through generations. Thomas Granger, a local historian with a fascination for the macabre, decided to investigate the truth behind the legend for his upcoming book. He was particularly interested in the unsolved murder of a miner, a story that had haunted the town since the early 1900s. Determined to separate fact from fiction, Thomas planned a trip to Mine Road, hoping to uncover clues and perhaps put some restless spirits to peace. The evening Thomas chose for his expedition was cold and clear, the autumn leaves rustling ominously in the breeze. Equipped with a flashlight, a notebook, and his camera, he set out for Mine Road just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The road, overgrown with weeds and flanked by dense woods, seemed to swallow the light, leaving an eerie twilight in its wake. As Thomas walked, he recounted the legend. A miner, whose name had been lost to time, was brutally murdered on his way home from a long shift. Some said it was a robbery. Others believed it was an act of vengeance. His body had been found on the roadside, lifeless and cold, but the killer was never caught. Over the years, locals reported seeing the miner's ghost wandering the road, his spectral form forever seeking justice. The deeper Thomas ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl were the only sounds breaking the silence. He reached a spot where the road curved sharply, a place that matched descriptions from the old newspaper clippings he had found. Here he decided to set up camp and wait, hoping to catch a glimpse of the supernatural. Hours passed and midnight approached. Thomas's eyelids grew heavy, and he began to doubt he would find anything. Just as he was about to pack up and leave, a faint light appeared in the distance. It flickered like an old lantern, bobbing gently as if carried by an unseen hand. Heart pounding, Thomas grabbed his camera and crept closer. The light grew brighter, and soon a figure emerged from the shadows. Dressed in tattered work clothes, covered in coal dust, and carrying a lantern, the ghostly apparition of the miner stood before him. Thomas's breath caught in his throat as the miner turned, revealing hollow, sorrowful eyes. The specter raised a hand, pointing down the road, before disappearing into the darkness. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, Thomas followed the direction indicated by the ghost. The path led him deeper into the woods, to a clearing where the remnants of an old cabin stood. Inside, he found what appeared to be a miner's personal effects: tools, a lunch pail, and an old diary. The diary's pages were yellowed with age, but the words were still legible. As Thomas read, the story unfolded. The miner, whose name was John Harris, had been embroiled in a dispute with a group of men over a hidden cache of gold they had found in the mine. John had planned to go to the authorities, but the men had ambushed him on Mine Road, silencing him forever. They took the gold and buried it near the cabin, believing no one would ever find it. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and Thomas felt a presence behind him. Turning, he saw John's ghost again, pointing towards a spot near the cabin's crumbling hearth. With trembling hands, Thomas dug into the earth and uncovered a small rusted chest. Inside were gold nuggets and a blood-stained knife, the murder weapon. As Thomas held the knife, the ghost of John Harris stood before him one last time. The miner nodded, a look of gratitude in his spectral eyes, before slowly fading away. Thomas knew he had to bring this evidence to the authorities to finally bring closure to John's story. The next day, Thomas presented the diary, gold, and knife to the local sheriff. The revelation shocked the town, and the legend of Mine Road was transformed from ghost story to historical truth. John Harris's spirit was finally at rest, and Thomas's book became a bestseller, forever linking his name to the tale of the haunted road. But some nights, when the wind howls through the trees and the moon casts eerie shadows on Mine Road, locals still whisper about the ghostly lantern light that sometimes appears, a reminder of a restless spirit that found peace thanks to the courage of one man who dared to seek the truth.